So before starting our webinar, I want to request all attendees to mute their microphones through audio option that is visible on your screen. And if you have any queries during the presentation, you can drop it in chat box, which is on the top right corner of your screen. We will be conducting discussion session at the end of the webinar. Okay, our topic for today's webinar is diabetic retinopathy, what we must know. And as a speaking delegate, we have Chief Medical Director of Lumbini Eye Institute and Research Center, retinal physician, Associate Professor Dr. Gyanendra Lamichhane. Hello, sir. Are you there?
Yeah, hello. Am I audible to you all?
Yes, sir. You
Hello.
are audible. I feel so honored to welcome you here, sir.
Same here. So I'm waiting
Now,
for
I
your
guess I'll
permission to
proceed with
start.
your presentation.
Okay. Thank you, Anusa. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome you all in this webinar. And I am very thankful to the entire Mero Eye team for giving me this opportunity. And I hope we all are staying safe in this lockdown period. Before starting my talk, I just like to highlight that diabetic retinopathy is itself a session of 1 to 2 days in various conferences. But I would like to say something in 1 hour. That's why I've kept my topic heading is what we must know, because there are lots of things that we should know in diabetic retinopathy. But few minimum thing I think we all optometrists and ophthalmologists must know. So it is some sort of comprehensive type of presentation I have tried to make it. With your permission, I'm going to start. So I have nothing to disclosure and I have no conflict of interest in this presentation. I may mention the name of some of the drugs, but I have no financial interest on those. So these are some of the important layouts on which we are going to discuss today. First of all, we'll discuss briefly about introduction and background of diabetic retinopathy, epidemiology and its prevalence, risk factor, pathogenesis, clinical feature, management aspects, screening and follow-up schedules, and what are the awareness modalities we can adopt for the community prevention of the blindness from diabetic retinopathy. In a definition, diabetic retinopathy, it's a chronic progressive sight-threatening disease of retinal microvasculature associated with prolonged hyperglycemia and other condition which is linked to diabetes such as hypertension. So one important question is, why should we know about the diabetic retinopathy? Because we all believe that prevention of vision loss in certain retinal diseases like diabetic retinopathy, retinal vascular occlusion, and age-related macular degeneration. So these are equally important as the restoration of sight in case of cataract, which will ultimately lead to the reduced blindness in our community. So if we see the evidences, so diabetic retinopathy is one of the leading cause of blindness in working age population. And if we can detect it early and timely, intervention will reduce the chances of vision loss, and even with some expect we can get some vision gain. And good control of all modifiable risk factors will delay the onset and progression of diabetic retinopathy, which ultimately prevent the vision loss. So what is the global diabetic scenario? If we see if we can quote some of these studies or articles, we can find that the worldwide prevalence of diabetic retinopathy is found to be around 34.6%. And according to the WHO, it estimates that diabetic retinopathy is responsible for 4.8% of the 37 million cases of blindness throughout the world. So this is the magnitude of the global scenario. And similarly, if this trend will go on increasing, if we see the data of 2015 and if we project the data of coming 2040, we can see that the number of adult with diabetes and the patient having diabetic retinopathy and patient with the sight-threatening diabetic retinopathy, the almost all of them is going to be almost increased by 1.5 by the end of the 2040. Similarly, according to the International Diabetic Federation study, they projected that if the current trend continue, then 1 in 10 adults will have diabetes by 2040. And of this, 1 in 3% will develop diabetic retinopathy, which can cause the blindness. So these are the some global scenario. And one interesting, previously it was supposed that the diabetes is the disease of rich community, but the researchers has found that 3 out of the 4 diabetic live in the low resource countries, and 1 in 2 diabetes is still underdiagnosed. So what is the perspectives in Nepal? So one study, epidemiological study of blindness done by IAPB, it shows that cataract is still the leading cause of blindness, and followed by posterior segment disease, which included diabetic retinopathy and others, and followed by glaucoma. So in the right hand side, you can see there is the iceberg. So what the number of cases today we are seeing in our community, it may be simply just the tip of the iceberg, and lots of diabetic cases may be hidden in the community. And we all know that the cataract is the leading cause of blindness. But if the trend keeps on increasing, by the coming decade, diabetic retinopathy may be the one of the maybe surplus the cataract, causing the leading causes of the diabetic retinopathy. So Nepal scenario. So one study published by the International Diabetic Federation in 2017, they found that there was total 16 million adult population in Nepal, and considering 4% diabetes of that adult population, total about 6.5 lakh, there may be the diabetic cases in adult. So what is the status of diabetic retinopathy in Nepal? Till date, we don't have any national-wise study, but if we see some of the studies done in Nepal, most of them are the hospital-based and community-based studies. And one study done by the Poudelji et al., they found that the variable prevalence of diabetic retinopathy ranging from 17% up to the 78% of the population. Similarly, one study is done by the Mishra SK et al. It was done in Birganj and Kathmandu, about in 5,400 patients. They found the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy being 10%. And one hospital-based study done in the Kathmandu, they found that the prevalence of the diabetic retinopathy was among 38% among the diabetes that were admitted in the hospital. And the similar result was found in another study which was done in the eastern part of the Nepal. And they have also maintained that the prevalence of diabetic retinopathy was around 38.8%. And if we see the knowledge, attitude, and practice of diabetes retinopathy among diabetic patients, we can see that in that study done by the Mishra SK et al., about 81.61% of the diabetes, they know that the diabetes can affect the eyes in diabetic person. Similarly, approximately 75% of the patient, they know that the complication due to diabetic may lead to the blindness. And approximately 81% they know that the people with diabetes should have their regular eye checkup. So if we take basis of this study, we can know that some sort of awareness is nowadays there in Nepal.
Excuse me, sir.
Okay.
Can you just go a bit
Hello?
slowly? Can you just go a bit
Okay.
slowly?
Okay. Okay. So one of the so what is the common cause of increasing blindness from diabetic retinopathy? The most common cause is the undetected diabetic cases in community, because we know that most of the cases are still undetected in the community. And the second being the lack of awareness. This is one of the causes for increasing blindness from our diabetic retinopathy in our community. The third one is the ignorance and negligence despite the knowledge. That is, majority of the people, they know that they have diabetes, and they know that diabetic retinopathy may cause the blindness, but still they are not managed to get their check done in the hospital. And another important cause for increasing blindness from diabetic retinopathy is lack of symptom of diabetic retinopathy in early stage, because the symptoms like decreased vision and floaters, they usually appear in the late stage of the diabetes retinopathy. So it may be one of the causes of causing blindness or late detection. And another one is the inaccessibility to the retina surface in all eye centers, because we don't have that much of trained human resources in the retina, and most of the hospital and eye centers, we don't have the equipment availability. And another one cause is the treatment unaffordability, because we know that the cost for laser, the cost for injection, and the cost for surgery. So these may be the one of few common causes for increasing blindness from diabetic retinopathy in our community. So let's have a look on some of the risk factors of diabetic retinopathy. So we can categorize it into the two parts. One is modifiable factors that can be controlled by ourselves. Another one is a non-modifiable, which is usually not controllable. So we can see there are lots of list. So we can discuss in few of them. And there are various clinical evidences which shows that the risk factors are associated with the progression of the diabetic retinopathy. So I would like to pick some of the common risk factors to discuss here. So first one is the duration of diabetes mellitus. So this is one of the most important risk factor. And if we follow the study done by Wisconsin epidemiological study, it says that diabetes mellitus diagnosed before the age of 30 years, uh, almost 50% will develop retinopathy after 10 years, whereas 90% of them develop retinopathy after 30 years. And another statement says that after 20 years of diabetic mellitus, 99% of type 1 have retinopathy and 60% of the type 2 develop retinopathy. And in type 1 people, they rarely develop diabetic retinopathy before 5 years of diagnosis of diabetes mellitus. Whereas interestingly, in type 2 diabetes, nearly 5% of diabetes have diabetic retinopathy at presentation. So this is very much important. That's why during recommendation for eye checkup, for all those patients with type 2 diabetes, we always advise them to check your eyes for retinopathy as soon as you become diagnosed as diabetic, because 5% may have developed retinopathy at the time of diagnosis. The second one important risk factor is the poor glycemic control. And the study, that is DCCT, Diabetes Clinical Control Trial, and United Kingdom PDS studies, they found that if we can control the blood sugar very tightly within normal range, so it has both the advantage of delaying development, as well as if diabetic retinopathy will develop, its rate of progression also slows down. So I just like to share one or two slides regarding this. This is very much important. The summary of the DCCT study. So we can see there, if we can control the glycemic blood sugar level in a very tight manner, it will reduces the risk of onset of diabetic retinopathy by 76%, whereas it will reduces the progression of pre-existing diabetic retinopathy by 63%, and 56% will reduces the need for laser surgery. Similarly, the more or less similar finding was done by the UKPDS studies. Here we can see also the summary is that with the good control of blood sugar, the progression will be reduced, the need for laser photocoagulation will be decreased, the chances of development of complication like vitreous hemorrhage will be decreased. And they recommended to keep the HbA1c level targeted up to 6.5 to 7%. And regarding pregnancy and diabetic retinopathy, if we quote the DCCT study, they told that pregnancy is one of the aggravating factor for progression of diabetic retinopathy. And similarly, hypertension, all the diabetes patient are requested to keep their blood pressure around 140 to 80. And nephropathy, according to those studies, if the patient have corresponding nephropathy along with the diabetes mellitus, the chances of retinopathy in those patients is severe in compared to another diabetic who have no nephropathy. So cataract surgery. So it is one of the very interesting thing. Most of the patient we see that they have diabetic retinopathy and they come for the cataract surgery. So in a diabetic patient, we should never be hurried to do the cataract surgery because cataract surgery may causes the progression of diabetic retinopathy. If we see the study at the bottom, you can see I have quote one study, that is diabetic retinopathy clinicalresearch.net protocol Q. If we follow that protocol, they told that if we do cataract surgery in a diabetic patient, the chances of progression to the vision loss will be 10 to 20% in about 16 week after the surgery. So whenever you plan for cataract surgery in diabetic patient, make sure that he has controlled retinopathy status before jumping to the cataract surgery, until and unless it's very dense cataract that you are not able to see the fundus. Similarly, one good thing is also there, the high myopia, choroidal degeneration, and extensive old chorioretinal retinopathy. These are some of the protective factor against the diabetic retinopathy. The actual mechanism why these conditions have protective mechanism is still not known, but it is believed that they act in the same manner as that of the panretinal photocoagulation by reducing the metabolic demand for the retina. Now, after that, let's come to the pathogenesis. Diabetic retinopathy is one of the microangiopathy, just like neuropathy and nephropathy. And the basic two mechanism here interplays for all this pathogenesis. One is retinal capillary occlusion and another is retinal capillary leakage. So what happens? How does this occlusion and leakage happens? We should understand that whenever there is a long-standing hyperglycemia or long-standing diabetes, it causes or it produces various type of changes in blood as well as blood vessels, such as there is thickening of the basement membrane, there is damage to the endothelial cells, and there is a change in RBC shape, as well as there is stickiness of the platelet. So all these conditions, what they causes? They causes the retinal occlusion and as well as leakage. Beside this is one of the mechanism. Another one is long-standing diabetes mellitus may causes the cellular damage through the various pathway. That is, there is conversion of the glucose to the sorbitol, and there is generation of lots of free radicals and accumulation of the advanced end product of glycation. Similarly, in diabetes, there is a damage to the endothelium as well as damage to the pericytes. So which is one of the contributing factor for the microvascular occlusion. And we all know that there are two types of blood-brain barrier: outer blood-brain barrier, which is formed mainly by the retinal pigmented epithelium tight junction, and inner blood retinal barrier, which is formed by the endothelium tight junction of retinal capillary endothelium. So in diabetic retinopathy, there is the damage of this blood retinal barrier. So let's compile all these pathogenesis, and we see in this flow chart what actually happens. So whenever there is all these pathogenesis I mentioned above, that is all this capillary endothelium damage, basement membrane thickening. So ultimate result is the microvascular occlusion. And whenever there is microvascular occlusion, growth factor that is commonly causes VEGF, and this VEGF causes the neovascularization, basically in the three area, that is in the optic disc, what we call is the NVD, is in the retina, that is called is NVE elsewhere, and iris, that what we call is NVI. So one interesting, though all those new vessels are very fragile, and even with the simple eye movement or just by minor trauma, it causes the bleeding or rupture of the blood vessels. Ultimately, it causes the bleeding and the decreased vision. So this is the all sequence of the microvascular occlusion. So we should also know that inside our body, there is both. One is angiogenic factor, one is anti-angiogenic factor. The angiogenic factors are the VEGF and other factors, whereas anti-angiogenic is the endostatin in others. And in diabetic retinopathy, what happens? The concentration of this VEGF surplus is the anti-angiogenic, so which leads to the formation of the new vessels and all these sequences. So another pathogenesis, one is microvascular occlusion, another is microvascular leakage. So what happens? When there is degeneration and loss of pericytes, there is weakening of the capillary wall, which causes the leakage, ultimately retina, edema, and there is a hard exudate. And at the same time, when there is a weakening of the capillary wall, what happens? These blood vessels started to pouting out, and we called it at microaneurysms. And these microaneurysm, when the ruptures, it converted into the intraretinal hemorrhage, so which we are going to discuss later on. So these are the overall compilation of what I discussed till now. So now, after pathogenesis, we'll move toward the classification of diabetic retinopathy. So if we follow this standard classification given by International Classification of Diabetic Retinopathy, it has categorized one classification for diabetic retinopathy and another classification for diabetic macular edema, because these two are the separate entity. In diabetic retinopathy, it is classified as no DR, then mild NPDR, moderate NPDR, severe NPDR, and proliferative. Similarly, in diabetic macular edema, there is no DME and non-central involving DME and central involving DME. So for our easy convenience, we can classify it, or just for clinical practice and for remembering, this is the simple classification I have made. So you can broadly categorize into four headings. One is NPDR, what we call non-proliferative. It is mild, moderate, severe, and very severe. We'll discuss it later. What is mild, what is moderate. And another one is proliferative, that is PDR. It is again classified into low risk and high risk characteristics. And third one is the diabetic macular edema, which is also called as the CSME. And it has also sub-classification. And fourth one is the sequelae of the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which is also called as the advanced diabetic eye diseases like vitreous hemorrhage, fractional retinal detachment, neovascular glaucoma, and epiretinal membrane. So before going to the criteria, let's understand some of the common terminologies, such as what is microaneurysms, what is retinal hemorrhage, what do we mean by dot and blot hemorrhage, what is hard exudate, what is cotton spot. So we'll see all one by one. So microaneurysm, as we have already mentioned in pathogenesis, when there is weakening of the capillary wall, there is the saccular dilatation of the capillary wall. It is simply the outpouching, and it is caused by the focal dilatation of capillary wall. So these are the microaneurysms you can see. And these microaneurysms, if we do fundus angiogram, it will causes the scattered hyperfluorescence due to the leakage of the dye. Then come to the retinal hemorrhage. So whenever these microaneurysms rupture, it will there will be the definitely hemorrhage in the retina. So it is basically two types. One is called dot hemorrhage, dot and blot hemorrhage, and another one is called flame-shaped hemorrhage. So we can see this is the dot and blot hemorrhage. So these hemorrhages usually occur into the outer plexiform or inner retinal nuclear layer. And outer plexiform and inner nuclear layer, the nerve fiber are attached in very tightly manner. That's why they have the definitive shape. And another one is the superficial, what we call as the flame-shaped hemorrhage, and these usually occur into the nerve fiber layer. And the fiber in nerve fiber layer is loosely arranged. That's why they adopt this diffuse pattern of hemorrhage. So these are the some of the feature of the microaneurysm, a dot plot hemorrhage and flame-shaped hemorrhage. This is flame-shaped hemorrhage. This is dot hemorrhage, and blot hemorrhage is a little bit larger. And next, come to the exudates. The exudates are basically two types. It is called hard exudate and soft exudate, and they have different mechanism for development. So first let's discuss about the hard exudate. Hard exudate are nothing but they are the lipid material, and I have talked one line here: cells with the tide in the sea. That means, let's see this figure. Whenever the tide in the sea come, they will bring lots of this cells-like material, and when we can compare this tide with the retinal edema, and when it will subside, the retinal edema will go, but all these things remain in the retina. So these are the types of hard exudate, and they are called hard because they are very definite in shape and they are highly reflectile. So they are also in the outer plexiform in the inner nuclear layer. That's why they have definite rounded shape. And next one is the cotton wool spots. So the pathogenesis is entirely different. In cotton wool spots, it is due to the nerve fiber layer ischemia, which causes the exoplasmic stasis and ultimately distension of the exoplasma and produces the cotton wool spots. So you can see the cotton wool spots. It is in the nerve fiber layer. So this is the clinical picture of cotton wool spots. And there are other venous and arterial changes like venous looping and venous beading, venous segmentation. So all these are the strong predictor of the proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And another one term is the IRMA, that is the intraretinal microvascular abnormalities. It is nothing but it is a shunted vessels. Whenever there is hypoxia, as a compensatory mechanism, there is an arteriovenous shunt. So these are some of the criteria of the IRMAs. They are tortuous and dilated, and they don't leak. They stain, but they don't leak on fluorescence angiography. And we all know about the new vessels. The new vessels, it may be in the, if it is in the disc, which is called disc, or within the 1 disc diameter, we called it NVD. And if it is away from the 1 disc diameter, we called it NVE. Okay, so these are the quite leaky vessels. You can see in this angiogram, there is a leakage of the dye. So after we learn about what is microaneurysm, what is intraretinal hemorrhage, let's come back again to that classification. So if there is nothing abnormality, we term it as the no diabetic retinopathy. And if there is only microaneurysms, we call it at mild NPDR. And we just leave moderate for one. We directly jump to severe NPDR. If it is only microaneurysms, it is mild. And if it follows the 4:2:1 rule, what we call as, if there is a more than 20 hemorrhage in all 4 quadrant, or definite venous bleeding in 2 quadrant, or IRMAs in 1 quadrant, if we have any one of these 3, we call it severe NPDR. And those that is between mild to moderate, we call it mild to severe, we call it as the moderate. And proliferative. So the simplest way is, whenever you see new vessels, don't think of NPDR, it is straightway proliferative diabetic retinopathy. When you see any retinal hemorrhage, vitreous hemorrhage, pre-retinal hemorrhage, or neovascularization, this is straightway proliferative diabetic retinopathy. And coming to the macular edema, there are different types of classification, which I will discuss later on. So basically, it is for the clinical and the prognostic approach, we classified into non-central and central. If it involves the center of the fovea, we call it central involving, and if it is not, we call it non-central involving. So let's see in the picture. First of all, NPDR. So to classify it as NPDR, there must be no new vessels. If you see new vessels and you classify it NVDR, you are wrong. Okay, so NPDR means no new vessels. So let's start. This is mild NPDR as per our classification. We can see only few microaneurysms and cotton wool spots. Then before going to the moderate, I will jump to the severe. We can see all this hemorrhage in all these 4 quadrant, that is severe. and something in between two is the moderate. So you can classify in this way NPDR. So proliferative diabetic retinopathy, it is obvious if we see new vessels or its consequences like vitreous hemorrhage, periretinal hemorrhage, vitreous hemorrhage, subhilar hemorrhage. So these all are the proliferative. And beside this, there is the high risk PGR, so which has the high chance to converting into the vision loss. And coming to the macular edema, this is the another entirety. Retinal thickening at or within 1 disc diameter is called as the macular edema. So this is very important because it is one of the leading cause of blindness in diabetic retinopathy, and 27% of the type 1 diabetes will develop macular edema within 9 years, whereas 28% will develop after 20 years. So these are some studies. So if we see the classification, International Clinical DME Severity Scale, it classified as a mild macular edema. So whenever you see macular edema in the posterior pole, but away from the center, it is a mild macular edema, DME. Whenever it's approaching the macula, it is moderate. When it's involving, it's called as the severe macular edema. And if we see the classification, we can classify it in two aspects. One is the FFA based, another is the OCT based. So FFA is the focal, diffuse, ischemic, and mixed, whereas OCT based, it is classified into the central involving, non-central involving, and other types of the edema. So basically, whenever we talk about the macular edema, we consider about the location, regarding the location. So these are the FFA based. We can see there is a focal diffuse maculopathy. There is a focal area of the leakage. This is the diffuse macular edema. You can see in angiogram there is diffuse leakage. Another one is the ischemic diabetic maculopathy. You can see in this. So one interesting feature, in case of diabetic retinopathy, if a patient complains that he has loss of vision or his vision is very poor, and on examination you see the fundus is absolutely normal, so you always think of it may be the ischemic maculopathy. That means in diabetic retinopathy, poor visual acuity with relatively normal appearing macula is a sign of macular ischemia. And sometimes they may present in the mixed pattern. And another one is this is the most commonly used in clinical practice for the before giving the laser or before giving the anti-VEGF injections. So these are the non-center involving and center involving DME. You can see in this OCT picture. So if there is thickening within the 3000 micrometer, but not involving the fovea, it is not center involving. If the fovea, you can see there is foveal depression is maintained. Here there is no foveal depression. So this is the central involving macular edema. Beside this, there are other classification of macular edema. You can go through that. The another term is the CSME. So nowadays this classification is not that much used because it was done during the time of the laser, but now once there is anti-VEGF like Avastin and other, so we hardly use this classification, and most of the retinal surgeon use this term interchangeably. Okay, so it may be considered as the more severe spectrum of the DME. So if you see the pathophysiology of DME, simply two mechanisms, because to understand the treatment, I think we should understand this pathology. The basic pathology is there is inflammatory release of inflammatory cytokine. That's why intravitreal steroid is one of the treatment for diabetic macular edema. At the same time, there is a VEGF release. So anti-VEGF is one of the mechanism for the treatment of diabetic macular edema. Now coming to the another one last classification, that is the advanced diabetic eye disease, which is the consequences of the proliferative diabetic retinopathy, which may be in the form of preretinal hemorrhage or vitreous hemorrhage, neovascular glaucoma, and tractional retinal detachment. So after the classification, coming to the clinical feature. So as I have already mentioned, in early stage, diabetic retinopathy is asymptomatic, and this is the point where maximum patients do blunder, that they don't come for hospital for checkup. Beside this, there are other symptoms like blurred vision, flutter, flashes, and fluctuating vision. So these all happens when there is a vitreous hemorrhage and macular edema. So this is the picture where how a patient sees when there is a vitreous hemorrhage. So few common causes of reduced vision in diabetic retinopathy is one is the refractive changes, another is diabetic cataract. We all know there may be the early cataract, and diabetic macular edema, vitreous hemorrhage, and complications. So these are the few common causes of reduced vision in a diabetic patient. So how will you diagnose a case of diabetes? Definitely, we'll take a history of the patient. We'll see all these systemic parameters and ocular history also, and visual acuity. And measurement of IOP is very much important because it may sometimes convert it into neovascular glaucoma. And gonioscopy. Before dilating a diabetic patient, make sure that you have examined the iris properly for any neovascularization. And whenever you see iris neovascularization, don't forget to do gonioscopy. And slit lamp examination with detailed fundus examination. I think we all know that. And so what are the investigation we do? Ocular investigation, I am coming on that. And systemic investigation, what we call is a DM profile test. So we should do hemoglobin because anemia is one of the cause for the progression of diabetic retinopathy, and fasting, PP blood sugar, HbA1c, that is glycosylated hemoglobin, lipid profile, kidney function test, and urine routine and microalbumin test. So we have kept this as a DM profile test, and definitely we'll do cardiac evaluation in certain cases. So coming to the ocular investigation. So what ocular investigation we like to do? One is, I recommend everyone to do a color fundus photograph. Whenever you see a case of diabetic retinopathy with certain changes, if there is no changes, it's okay. But if you see even a microaneurysm, don't try to forget a fundus, documented fundus photograph. And OCT will do nowadays. OCT is a non-invasive. We all know it is a non-invasive technique. We do is for retinal thickening or suspected diabetic macular edema, and monitoring the progress of anti-VEGF treatment like Avastin and other. And whenever we suspect there is a traction in the macula, so we'll do for OCT. And the role of OCT angiography is not that much important in diabetic retinopathy. It's more important in AMD. But still, if we want to see a macular ischemia, especially in case of pregnant lady where FFA is contraindicated, we can go for the OCTA. And FFA should never be a routine procedure or screening modality, and it should be done in case of suspected macular ischemia. And if we are planning for focal laser, we'll advise to do FFA. And some surgeon, it is dependent upon the retinal physician. Some physician like to do FFA in all cases of DME, whereas some other physician, they do selectively. And sometimes we do in case of NVA and IRMAs. And UAC definitely when there is media is hazy like cataract and vitreous hemorrhage, so we can go for ultrasound. Now coming to the management part. So the main goal of treatment, before starting treatment, we should explain the patient very clearly what is our goal of treatment, that we are treating you to prevent the further loss of vision, and to extend some time there may be the chances of restoring some degree of vision. So it is a combined effort of physician, definitely endocrinologist and ophthalmologist, and patient itself and dietitian. So it is a joint effort. So before going to the ocular treatment, definitely we should do the good control of blood sugar, blood pressure, and there are lots of studies saying that the good cholesterol control will causes the reduces the progression of the retinopathy, especially the statin and fibrates. We can go for accord and field studies, and good control of renal function and lifestyle modification. And the most important part is the ocular management, and it is not same for every patient. The basic principle of management of diabetic retinopathy is we categorize in three basic heading. One is management of diabetic retinopathy, second is management of diabetic macular edema, and third one is the management of complication. So there are lots of study. So I'm not going to discuss any of this because it is not the scope of this. So you can, in time, you can go through this study. This is the standard DRCR network. So you can see there are lots of protocols starting from A to V. So first of all, we should categorize which type of retinopathy need treatment. So based on the classification, NPDR, every patient of NPDR doesn't need treatment, whereas PDR, every patient of PDR need treatment. And in macular edema, treatment may or may need depending upon the condition. So in a nutshell, we can see that if the case is mild or moderate NPDR, we can just observe the patient, provided that there is no macular edema. Whereas for PDR, we should always treat. Regarding severe NPDR, there is mixed opinion. Some said that there is no need of treatment, we can just follow up. But if the patient is very intelligent or they can make regular follow-up, in such condition you can do follow-up. Otherwise, better to treat with laser. Don't take risk. So management of diabetic retinopathy. So different modalities are, we know basically four types. One is laser, one is intraocular injection, which is basically for the diabetic macular edema. Another is surgery for a complication, and finally is the visual rehabilitation. And this treatment may be individual treatment, or sometimes we may need combination of therapy. Some patient may need laser only, some patient may need laser as well as intravitreal injection. So you have to categorize individually. So these are the overall summary of this. And these are the different types of laser we use. There are argon laser, frequency double laser, micropulse diode laser, and yellow laser, especially they are the macular friendly laser. And they are also continuous versus pulse laser. The basic difference you should know that is, in continuous wave laser there is no cooling effect. We can giving the laser continuously, and there is more collateral damage. Whereas in case pulse laser, there is targeted laser and there is less collateral damage. So these are the two pictures of PRP. This one is the single spot conventional PRP. Here we can see the multi-spot. It is called patterned PRP. So this is the importance of the laser. Before laser, we can see there is a new vessels. After that, there is a complete regression of new vessels. So these are the consequences of not doing laser. So after that, treatment of macular edema is very important. So we have already discussed about what to do. We should do, whenever you suspect a DME, always do OCT in all cases for baseline. And you check for central foveal thickness and macular volume, and FFA in selected case, as I have mentioned before. So these are the various protocol of the treatment of the diabetic macular edema. So the laser treatment is one of the option. If there is a focal edema, we will go for focal laser. Previously, we used to do the grid laser, but nowadays we have the anti-VEGF, and this grid laser has become almost replaced by the anti-VEGF. That means nowadays no more will do the grid laser. So this is the some photograph you can see. So this is the non-central involving DME, you can see, and this is the grid photocoagulation for the macular laser. So nowadays we don't do it. And there are the certain advantages and disadvantages of the laser. It is definitely a cheap than the anti-VEGF, but it may sometimes causes the foveal burn, and it may causes the central scotoma. And there are certain complications of the laser, like foveal burn, macular edema, pain in scotoma. And this, the new game changer in the management of the diabetic macular edema and diabetic retinopathy is the anti-VEGF and the steroids, that is the intravitreal injection. So anti-VEGF, as we have already mentioned, that there is the increased concentration of VEGF, which is responsible for all this pathology. So currently there are 4 anti-VEGF in market. This is but ranibizumab and aflibercept, they are only the FDA approved. But we are using bevacizumab, that is what we call it Avastin, as an off-label. It is very cheap. So these are the various anti-VEGF, and this we can see the cost of anti-VEGF. The Lucentis is very costly. So whenever there is a history of recent stroke or heart attack, or if we are planning for nasal surgery, so these are certain conditions where we stop, we shouldn't give the anti-VEGF. And regarding intraocular steroid, anti-VEGF is always the first choice in case of macular edema, and steroid is always the second choice. But there are certain conditions where we give intravitreal steroid as a first modalities. That is when there is anti-VEGF failure or recent cataract surgery or pseudophakic patient. So these are some of the intravitreal steroid. The main issue with the steroid is we all know that cataract and the glaucoma. So coming to the advantage of steroid, so less frequent dosing is required. We can do every 2 or 3 months. So these are the comparison between corticosteroid and the anti-VEGF. Corticosteroid is relatively safe in compared to the anti-VEGF, and it has longer duration of action of 12 to 16 weeks, whereas anti-VEGF we have to inject it every monthly. So this is one of the our patient. In the left hand side we can see there is a huge macular edema before intravitreal injection, and this is the same patient after giving single dose of the Avastin. You can see there is a quite good settling of the macula, and the thickness has almost reduced from 659 to almost 223. So if we see the evidence-based practice in case of DME, so this is the simple flow chart that everyone can understand. So let's start where whenever you see a case of diabetic macular edema, always do OCT and find out whether it is non-center involving or center involving. If it is non-center involving, you can do the focal laser. If it is center involving but vision is good, you can just observe the patient. We do regular follow-up 1 monthly, and if it is center involving and vision is less than 6.9 and central foveal thickness is also increased, you can do for anti-VEGF. And besides, whenever you see there is a traction, in case of macular edema, there is no role of giving anti-VEGF. You can consider for vitreoretinal surgery. So this is the common algorithm. You can follow this. So definitely intravitreal injection is not free of complication. So there are certain common complications like subconjunctival hemorrhage. Sometimes even it can lead to the endophthalmitis. So after that, third part, management of the complication of diabetic retinopathy. Definitely surgery is one of the option. So we go for vitrectomy and other procedures. So coming to the few common indication of vitrectomy. So if it is a non-clearing vitreous hemorrhage, previously we used to wait for 3 months to do vitrectomy, but nowadays with the minimal invasive vitreoretinal surgery, that is sutureless vitrectomy, now we can do vitrectomy in 1 month. If diabetic patient vitreous hemorrhage is not clearing within 1 month, we can go for vitrectomy. We need not to wait till 3 months. And diabetic macular edema, if anti-VEGF is not working, steroid is not working, in that condition, as a final option, we can try for vitrectomy. And the last part is we shouldn't neglect this rehabilitation component also, because we can sometimes use lots of low vision devices so that at least we can facilitate the patient to do their regular daily activities. These are some of the recent advances in diabetic retinopathy. In laser, nowadays we have micropulse laser, subthreshold laser, Navalis navigated laser system, and we have ultra wide angiography. I can just show this interesting photograph. You can see in this left photograph, if angiogram, it looks normal. It is about the conventional fundus angiogram with 30-degree view. So this one is the about 200-degree view. You can see those, it's supposed to be normal, but when we did this wide image photograph, this imaging, this one FFA, we can see these lots of new vessels and ischemic area, which was not picked up in this conventional photo, that's angiographic. And beside this, we have various newer drug under trial. And coming to the recommended eye examination schedule, as we have already mentioned, in type 1, we always do examination after 3 to 5 years of diagnosis, thereafter yearly. In type 2, we should do at the time of diagnosis. In case of pregnancy, whatever it is type 1 or type 2, always recommended to do retina examination prior to conception and early in first trimester. So this is the some of the referral criteria when to refer a patient to an ophthalmologist. So in case of diabetic retinopathy, we can see if there is a no retinopathy or very mild diabetic retinopathy and no edema, we can just referral is not required. You can just examine patient 1 to 2 yearly. And as the degree of retinopathy progresses, we should improve the criteria for referral. And similar applies in case of the diabetic macular edema. So this is a simple algorithm for the referral, what I have mentioned in previous slide. So finally, my recommendation to all my viewers, this classes and clinics, there is no substitute for classes and clinics. The more you see the patient, the more you do your clinics, the more you learn. And I still recommend some standard textbook like Kansky, A.O. Ryan. And please go through some journals like Retina, Retinal Physician, IJO and AJO. And if you have time and interested, I suggest you to go through some of the evidence-based studies. This DRCR.net protocol is very important. There are lots of protocols starting from A to W, but at least you should have thorough idea about protocol I, S, and T, which is very much important in our scenario. And this one is the ICO guideline. You can just log into that website and you see detail of this, how we can do the diabetic eye care. And before concluding my talk, I just like to share something how we can do the awareness in community, because awareness is one of the very much important factor to prevent the blindness, because once diabetic retinopathy develops, it is very costly, especially in low resource country like our, where there is no insurance system. So we can use lots of awareness pamphlets and poster. We can use various medias like radio, television to aware the people. We can use the various target group in the community to aware them. And we can use make use of the various social media like YouTube and Facebook. And November is that we can celebrate or observe November as a World Diabetic Eye Disease Month. And we all know that 14th November is the World Diabetic Day. So we can observe with the various awareness program during this period. So thank you so much for your kind attention. So if you have any question, inquiries, I am happy to take it. So over to you, Asma.
Thank you, sir, for such
Hello?
an informative session.
Yeah.
Also, thanks to all attendees for the patience as well. Sir, can you please turn your video on for making the discussion session more interactive? Okay, now we'll go ahead and take some time for questions. Let me check out what the questions that you all have raised. Okay. Mr. Ananta has asked, so what will be your suggestion to patients who has missed laser or anti-VEGF during this lockdown pandemic period?
Okay, that's a very nice question. So our ophthalmic society and also other society has make a guideline. So what are the emergency and what are they have criteria? Makes 3 criteria: urgent, emergent, urgent, and elective. And so we try to so those who are one-eyed or receiving anti-VEGF, they have kept them as a emergent criteria. So I think most of the hospitals are giving the anti-VEGF. If we consider our Lumini Eye Institute, we also trying to continue that anti-VEGF, but currently we are just renovating our OT. That's why we are not able to do that one. But once we have completed, most hopefully from next month we'll start those who are receiving regular anti-VEGF. And for the time being, if you are not getting that one, please try to keep your all these systemic parameters in controllable as much as possible. That much we can do currently. Yeah.
And the other question is again from Mr. Ananda, and he has asked how
Hmm.
often we use Lucentis and Macugen, especially in Nepal.
Okay, so the Macugen is almost nowadays absolute. It was a first anti-VEGF. It was the time when it was discovered. And regarding Lucentis, Lucentis is actually FDA approved, but in Nepal it is not available even because it is very costly. And we are currently using only the anti-VEGF. It is Avastin as a offline. Currently, we are not using Lucentis in Nepal.
Solu Gautam has
And if
asked
we,
how. Sorry.
okay. Yeah, please continue.
Solu Gautam has asked how cataract surgery accelerates the progression of DR in diabetic patient, and what should we consider
Okay.
before planning cataract surgery in diabetic
Okay.
patient.
So it's a very important question. So one study it was done. If I have that, that's why I'm that's emphasizing on that DRCR.net study. If we go through that different protocol, there is one protocol called Protocol Q that have done studied that they in that study they found that if we do cataract surgery in especially non-center involving diabetic macular edema, and it will and 10 to 20% of them progress to the central involving diabetic macular edema at 16 weeks. And the exact mechanism is not known, but it is supposed that it causes the various disturbances and may induces the retinal ischemia. Somehow it causes the retinal ischemia, which causes the progression. And regarding suggestion, what I suggest that if the cataract is very dense and we are not able to grade the diabetic retinopathy, we'll do the cataract surgery as early as possible, and we do immediate fundus evaluation in the post-op, and we manage according. We have to treat the diabetic retinopathy as soon as possible in the post-op period. Yeah.
So shall I go for other question?
Yeah, sure.
What are the basic things we optometrists can do in our private clinical practice for patients with diabetic retinopathy?
Okay, so what we can do is, first of all, you should educate the patient. One thing about the systemic, because what I have feel personally is that every patient know that we should control the diabetes in case of diabetes to prevent diabetic retinopathy or like that, but they are not aware that they should control lipid profile, they should control blood pressure. So first thing what we can do, starting from the systemic, always counsel the patient that the control and keeping this lipid profile and blood pressure is equally as important as that controlling the blood sugar. One thing is that. Second one is the always try to do whenever you see a diabetic patient, never let the patient undilated checking undilated, seeing that it's the 6/6 vision. So this is the very common thing that we often mix. So I always suggest you, whenever you get a diabetic patient, counsel them and motivate to do a detailed fundus examination, because what happens is the common example we find. Suppose if a patient of proliferative diabetic retinopathy, early stage proliferative diabetic retinopathy, patient has new vessels, but it is vision is absolutely normal, 6/6 vision. Patient doesn't know. So it is visible only after detailed fundus examination. And in those patients, if you do the laser, you can save the eye. So my suggestion, always counsel first. Number one, always counsel for detailed systemic control. Second, always do detailed dilated fundus examination. Even vision is 6/6 is normal. And third, whenever I have mentioned the referral criteria, if you think the patient needs referral for further investigation like OCT or that, never hesitate to refer to the well-equipped center. Yeah.
The other question is, please brief explain characteristic of arteriocapillary signs in collar fundus that helps to differentiate between venous and arterial occlusion in diabetic retinopathy fundus changes.
Okay. So venous. So you mean to say how to differentiate venous occlusion from diabetic retinopathy, retinal vein occlusion? I think that is the question they have been to say. So
Yes.
in the retinal vein occlusion, that is, yeah, sometimes fundus picture is very confusing. So what we can do that retinal vein occlusion usually, especially if it is a branch retinal vein occlusion, it is usually quadrantic. And the diabetic retinopathy, if we compare diabetic and hypertensive retinopathy, what we call diabetic retinopathy is a wet retinopathy, whereas hypertensive retinopathy is a, or vein occlusion is a dry retinopathy. That means to say, in fundus picture of diabetic retinopathy, you see lots of hard exudate, lots of microaneurysm, lots of dot plot hemorrhage, but very less amount of your flame shaped hemorrhage and cotoneal spots. Whereas if it is a hypertensive retinopathy or vein occlusion, you can see very less hard exudate. You can see lots of cotoneal spots, flame shaped hemorrhages, and these venous bleeding and this venous loop, these are the more sign of the diabetic retinopathy in compared to the hypertensive retinopathy. And this vein occlusion is usually unilateral, whereas diabetic retinopathy is always or almost it is a bilateral. If one eye has severe retinopathy, another eye has at least it has some sort of mild or moderate retinopathy. If you get diabetic retinopathy in one eye and normal fundus in retinal eye, another eye, you should always revise your diagnosis. It is very unlikely. Yeah.
How can we differentiate NVE and IRMS clinically, and what is the mechanism of
Okay.
venous bleeding?
Okay. So I escaped one slide, thinking that it may be too long, lengthy. So definitely IRMA and new vessels differentiation is very important. So if we see the clinically, the IRMA is usually as a deep retinal. Okay, it is usually deep retinal, whereas it is more toward the retinal side. So NV is usually in the at the vitreoretinal interface. Another one is IRMAs, what is called IRMA, IRMAs, they never crosses the major retinal blood vessels, whereas new vessels usually crosses the blood vessels. And if we do the angiogram, these IRMAs, they will never leak. They may stain, they may have some staining whitish appearance, but they will never leak as that of the new vessels, whereas new vessels, it has a frank leakage. Yeah.
Uh, so, can you please explain the treatment modality for non-central macular edema, protocol for using anti-VEGF in non-central macular edema?
Okay, it's very nice. Non-central involving macular edema. So one thing how to differentiate it is central and non-central, I have already mentioned. You will do OCT first, and if it is a non-central edema and vision is usually non-central edema, vision is usually supposed to be normal because it is non-central. So you can do simply, if you can do a one FFA, and if there is any leakage in that area, you will go for the focal laser. And non-central edema with visionless is usually very unlikely. Whenever it is visionless, it is almost more or less a central involving. So the treatment protocol for non-central involving macular edema is either observation or focal laser. We usually don't use anti-VEGF in non-central. Central anti-VEGF is reserved for the central involving macular edema. Yeah.
So now we are at the end of the question session. So if other anyone is interested, please feel free to type your questions into the chat box, or you can just unmute your microphone and come ahead with your questions.
Thank you so much, sir. There is another question from the Dr. Kishore Raj Pradhan, sir. Thank you so much for your question, Kishore, sir. So he's asking for, is there any absolute contraindication for the laser?
Okay. There is actually no absolute contraindication for laser, but there is still controversy whether we can do during the early trimester of pregnancy or not. So that's otherwise there is no that much absolute contraindication. But another one is still in debate is regarding the uncontrolled hypertension. So what is our clinical practice we are doing is, if patient has uncontrolled hypertension, or so in that condition, we usually defer the laser and ask for good control of blood pressure, and then we'll do laser. Otherwise, there is no absolute contraindication. Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess you have answered many of the queries. Is there anything else you wanted to cover up before a wrap up?
It's for me?
Yes, sir.
Yeah, okay. Thank you. So I think I have covered most of the, I've just touched, I don't say I have covered most of the thing. I have just touched most of the thing because I have already mentioned it is not possible for that one. And in future, if needed, we can talk separate topic. The sub, for example, we can talk one day or one session on the only in the management of diabetic macular edema, or simply just investigation in diabetic retinopathy. So we can segregate this and we'll do more talk in the future. And I think I have just touched most of the things that it is commonly in our practice.
Okay, we have the
Yeah.
other question, and Dr. Sarita has asked, in high IOP, we can do laser or not?
Definitely. If the another one is, suppose if it is a case of neovascular glaucoma, and if you can see the fundus, you can do the laser. Even some of the people in NVG, they avoid anti-VEGF in case of high IOP. But what we see, until and unless we will not inject anti-VEGF in high IOP, especially NVG, it will not going to resolve. So if you can see the fundus, because laser with high IOP, here I mean to say it is a neovascular glaucoma, and neovascular glaucoma with high IOP means there is, I assume that the cornea is usually hazy. So it's very difficult to see the fundus. So if you can see the fundus clearly, don't worry, go ahead with laser, with high IOP. Make sure that you can see the fundus.
Okay, the next question is, why FFA is contraindicated in the case of high blood sugar level?
So the FFA is not actually contraindicated in high blood sugar level. It is usually contraindicated in case of, if it is not absolutely the relative contraindicated in case of this renal impairment or pregnancy. But in high sugar, we usually don't. There is no such contraindication of doing FFA.
In which condition we should treat with laser, and in which condition with anti-VEGF?
Okay, so if we as I have already mentioned, there are two different category. One is diabetic retinopathy and one is the macular edema. If you are considering for diabetic, suppose case one is diabetic retinopathy, but there is no macular edema or DME. So in this, only proliferative diabetic retinopathy or some selected cases of severe NPDR, you can go with the laser. Now coming to the diabetic macular edema, if it is a central involving diabetic macular edema, you will go for focal laser. Sorry, is non-central diabetic macular edema, you will go for focal laser. If it is a central involving macular edema with vision less than 6/9 or 6/12, always start with anti-VEGF. And if there is no response to anti-VEGF or there is non-response to anti-VEGF, then you can trial for laser as a second modality. That is the focal laser. Yeah.
Okay, sir. There is another question from the Jagdish sir. Thank you so much,
Okay.
sir, for your question. So he is asking, sir, what are the action taken by the ophthalmologist if the optometrist forget to diagnose the diabetic retinopathy?
What are the actions?
Uh, uh,
What are the question?
sir.
I couldn't. What are the?
Okay, sir.
What
What
are
are the
Okay.
actions, sir?
Okay. Okay. Action. So I think
Action taken by the ophthalmologist if the optometrist forget to diagnose the DR.
if optometrist forget the DR.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
So I think
What
the
are the
clinical
action?
examination.
Yes, sir.
So I actually not sure what they mean by what are the actions. So diabetes, the basic concept to diagnose diabetic retinopathy is definitely the history of diabetes must be there. Besides this, you should do a detailed fundus examination and ancillary testing if you need it. So these are the basic steps. Always don't go for invasive technique like FFA or like that, because nowadays the science has done a lot of progress and we have very much non-invasive technique like fundus photograph and OCT. So try to go for that before going to the invasive technique, and it is I think it can be diagnosed very easily. It's not the big issue.
Okay, sir. Sir, Still, there are a lot of retina specialists in Nepal. But after the
Okay.
care, the patient went for the low vision. Still, there is we didn't have so much of functional vision test or anything. So, if you want to give a suggestion after the retinal treatment or after being the retina specialist, what could be the advice for the
Mhm.
low visions or after the treatment from the retina department?
Definitely, the low vision the one is one of the most. I think I don't know why it's so much neglected, and I must address that it must be given a use important emphasis. As sometime what happens, patient because in our country and in this subcontinent, the people are not that much educated, and we very not commonly get the patient in early stages. So, despite our good effort, we'll get lots of uh, not successful in the treatment. So these patient must have to go to the low vision, and so we should make sure that once we never hesitate to refer that patient to the low vision optometrist, and we should also make sure that once we have given them the low vision, they make it the proper use, and by this we can make at least we can facilitate their daily work and so make their life more easier. I think. Yeah.
Okay, considering the time limits here, I announce a closure of discussion session. And before ending today's session, I would like to thank and express my sincere gratitude towards our presenter, Dr. Ganendra Lamsani sir, and all the attendees. And indeed, it was such an interactive session. And I'm also grateful to Mayrai Foundation for providing me this opportunity to host this program. And herewith, I would like to end this session requesting you all to drop your invaluable reviews and feedback in the review file, and the link is available in the chat box. Stay home, stay safe, and keep in touch. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir.
Okay, thank you. You are welcome.
Okay, sir. Sir, if you have any, okay, he just left. No problem.